and today we're talking about the chicken's neck and what you get when you go across it. I must say that I myself have a connection and a feeling for the chicken's neck. Earlier this year, I took the most traumatic train ride from Goa to Assam, from Goa to Guwahati. And from Goa to, when I went from Panjim to Bombay, it was okay. But then after that, we went through the Badlands in a way. The train was invaded, and it was an awful experience. But the moment we crossed the chicken's neck, suddenly I started to relax. And it was because in fact that part of India, like Goa, has an alternate history, and it's almost bizarre that it's part of India. I mean, we're discussing different ways of belonging. It's very difficult for me to understand how people from the Northeast could even have a sense of belonging to this country. I hope you'll talk a little bit about that. I know your book is the most marvelous travel story. Just tell us about your engagement with this land from the beginning.
Well, actually, I went to Arunachal in 1974 when Itanagar was still being built. And that's the time when I fell in love with Northeast. I applied for a job actually as a teacher there. We didn't have the guts to take it. And then came back and at a point I was a journalist. And again, my engagement actually started with the Northeast when I was in Nehru University, and there were lots of students from in JNU from the Northeast. And I discovered that there were two lives they lived. One was these smiling, polite, nice people who would talk to you. And the other side, when they were with themselves, they were getting letters about bomb blasts and how people were killed and their brothers were tortured. And that is when I discovered the dark side of nation building in India. And that is how I decided to become a lawyer. And the first case that I did against the Indian Army was filed in 82-83. So it was a shock because unlike the other friends in the first session, I come from the mainstream. It's upper caste, upper class, Delhi person, and being brought up with a Nehruvian vision of India. At the age of 5, I was taken to see Bhakra Nangal, the temples of modern India. I mean, I was brought up very seriously as a person who must, committed to the official version of India. And it has been a very painful and long journey to discover that, to question that vision. And then I started taking up cases, which I have of course described a little bit in this book, I've taken up cases on behalf of people who are in armed groups like NSCN, Naga group, Alpha, various groups. And at that point, and of course in Kashmir, the person who attacked the Indian Parliament was one of my clients. So there was this attack. It didn't upset me too much, but as time grows, and now I'm 60, I felt the need to answer that why as an Indian, and I feel passionately Indian, but not committed to this official India, official discourse. Why did I take up cases? And that's what I've said right in the beginning, that why did a very passionately nationalistic Indian take up these anti-national, and what was anti-national about defending the Indian constitution? As a lawyer, if I'm taking up a case of a Kashmiri or a Naga who has been accused of something which he says he has not done, why is that anti-national? Why is it defending a corrupt policeman who has framed a Kashmiri or a Naga or someone else? That is patriotic. Why is it not patriotic to take up the cases of people who do not find space within the official India? So this book, in fact, as I've said in my beginning, and I should paraphrase it rather than read it out, is that this is a journey, my journey. This Sebastian and I, my husband is a Naga from Manipur, and all these years I've been representing people of the Northeast as a lawyer, as a human rights activist, as a teacher as well of human rights. But this journey was to find out India, and this journey is, as an Indian, to answer the question that what was I doing taking up these cases of people who bring in arms from Pakistan or from China what was making me take up these cases? And that's the engagement that I've had for the last 30 years. And some of the cases are still continuing. And that's the type of question that I've tried to answer in this book.
It's a very intimate book in so many ways because you talk about your own personal identity and your feelings about it. I was quite impressed when you talked about your own ethnic heritage. You encountered it when you represented a Kashmiri Muslim, right? So you had to confront those ideas. We obviously in Goa have similar kinds of strands and thoughts going about it. Tell me, this journey that took more than a month, which you drove, 4 months, you drove from Delhi did you really? Oh, okay, I didn't realize that. But tell us about your traveling companion a little bit. Nandita said that you don't speak, Mr. Amge, or don't speak so much. So, probably he has to be described because he's the most remarkable traveling companion, and your feelings about him come across in the book very powerfully.
Oh dear. I wasn't expecting this. Well, it's like there's just a scene which I want to really share with you, which is in the book, which is Marjari Island. It's not about the monks, but that's the place where Sanjay Ghosh, I'm sure a lot of you have heard, who was murdered. It was said he was murdered by Alpha, and Alpha did not, and Alpha, some parts of Alpha, it's very difficult to say Alpha as a whole, but they said that he was working for the Raw. Now, they did not substantiate these claims, but what happened in that whole episode was that I know his aunt, and I've written about her, Arundhati Ghosh. She was working under my father. And she was sitting with my father and saying, you know, this is what is happening, these Alpha people are going for human rights conferences, we must stop them. And she went on and on and on. And I tried to say something, and you are anti-national, just shut up. I mean, most people try and shut me up, and believe it or not, I do shut up sometimes. So I just kept quiet. But again and again, it struck me that when I started working with the Nagas, my father is a top bureaucrat, he is known to be close to Raw. Why was I accepted? And my husband, who was a Naga nationalist, and on our wedding day, in fact, it was said by the priest that I'm an Indian and he's a Naga. There, his father, who's a very quiet kind of person, he accepted me in the family when we got married. And even Sebastian never sort of threw this at me that you are an Indian and you are a Raw agent and you are a Kashmiri Pandit. He never threw these things at me. He has never done it in the 30 years I've known. And nor has any other Naga, including NSA and including other Nagas. And what was interesting is that only once did he mention, and that's what I've said in the book, is that his father was picked up, and the father is as mild and quiet, and he was such a lovely person. He was picked up from a small shop that he sold small things, soaps or whatever. And he was beaten up for no reason. And he was beaten up so badly that the family of 6 little children were brought up for a whole year by a mother who had no source of income. These were all small kids. But that did not make the Nagas say this is us and them. But Arundhati Ghosh from Foreign Service said, it is our violence and how dare. There was this us and them on the other side of us and them, if you see what I mean. So this is what I have learned, that if we as Indians, and I speak now as an Indian and always as an Indian, is if you do reach out, and if you cross some boundaries, if you believe this, and I think that's what I'm trying to figure out, how do you cross these boundaries? And it's very difficult. And as he said in the Kashmir case, I have nothing to do with Kashmiri Pandit community. I have never been brought up as a Kashmiri Pandit. I don't even like them. That's just because I don't like my own family. But that's because I don't like them. I know Nija Bhabhi is here. She's sort of family by family. But the point is, I've not been part, nor have my parents been, nor has my mother been. But suddenly to be told continuously you're a Kashmiri Pandit when I was doing this case, and liked because, when Gilani was shot outside my house, they said, oh, Kashmiri Pandit saved him. Now, if any of you were shot outside a house of acid and I would take you to hospital, I'm not going to ask you which nationality you are. So, that process which I've written in another book, that's another book and it's not in Across the Chicken Neck. That's interesting because that book was voted as the best book of the year in Pakistan by Dawn and not even reviewed here in India. So it's this kind of tension that I face all the time between my wanting to be an Indian national and finding that in the name of my nationalism, what is done to Nagas or to Kashmiris or to Mizos is something which is very difficult to reconcile.
Thank you so much for that. I must say this festival has always been about ways of belonging, and what we see here, we have very varied ways of belonging to what we're talking about. I don't even want to impose too much. I'd like to ask. I think people should ask you questions. But would you like to read? You must read something from your book for a little bit. Yes, I think it's a good idea. The introductions, anything really.
I have actually already told you what I've written in the introduction. I would like to read out perhaps just to give you an idea of what happens in Nagaland. Okay, please. This is a story. In fact, I've begun off by talking about a friend. I'll just tell you a little bit and then read it out. Whose father was in the Naga underground. After that, there was a accord, Shillong Accord. It's like the Kashmir Accord. It's the same year, in fact, during emergency. And he signed the accord. And then he became a traitor. And then this friendship of ours, because it began in college, was very deeply impacted because I was defending the NSCN and the other side of the accord, who were condemning the accord. And this friend was living a life as a daughter of a traitor. And to keep up a friendship in this kind is very, very difficult. And yet we both never discussed the father. Till the time he died and his body was brought back and he was given the full honors of a freedom fighter and buried with honor in Nagaland. This is the story of her life and a day spent with them. Throughout our conversations, Akhan's son watches television, unconcerned with everything happening around him. It really amazes me to see how the young people of Nagaland can glue themselves to the idiot box for up to 12 to 15 hours a day, watching mostly South Korean movies which are full of mindless violence. After a long and eventful day, it is time to creep into a warm bed and go to sleep. But I find that I cannot. I think of Akhan's son. Does he know anything about the days his father and many of that generation spent in the jungles, watching their villages burn? The screams of the women as they saw their husbands dragged away to be tortured, or the helplessness of the men as they saw their sisters raped. It is not only in Nagaland that people live with memories of brutalities committed by the Indian security forces. In Mizoram, students have kept alive the memory of the days when the Indian Air Force bombed Aizawl. These students demand a formal apology from the Indian state every year. None has been forthcoming so far. How does one deal with such memories? Here in this home, it seems to me that the mother has taken refuge in religion, the father in politics, and the son in television. Naga society is one which does not encourage self-expression, and there are many suppressed emotions and unspoken hurts. For the children, there is deep bewilderment. Acute irony undercuts the label, the land of festivals. At breakfast, Timika offers me rotis, which his Indian tenants have sent him. The rotis, he says, are meant to be eaten with lightly sauteed grasshoppers he has himself caught in the paddy fields. There are also some fried frog's legs. He insists that the grasshoppers and fried frog legs go well with rotis. When I asked Timika why he does not offer these delicacies to Sebastian of fellow Naga, he replies, I know he doesn't eat all this. Akan offers us more conventional fare of buttered toast, homemade cake and coffee. Their son, as usual, determinedly watches television.
Thank you so much for that. We'll have some questions. We were talking about Bollywood earlier. I must say in the Northeast, many places, Korea is actually the cultural giant. In Meghalaya, I have into a store, which is this side, which is all Korean movies and magazines, and young people only follow Korean culture.
No, Manipur.
I'm not sure. Everyone just watches Manipur, yeah, Korean movies.
Manipur is a culture, is actually a cultural powerhouse, and it should be. I mean, for India, they have the best rock bands and musicians. I mean, anyway. Yeah. Questions?
No, just a comment that your narrative reads really well, and I wish the book and you all the very best. And another thing which you said, that people automatically, more or less, they assume that people you have been defending Alpha, I don't think that is the perception in Assam. Most people do want Alpha or all the people you mentioned, they want good legal representation. They do. We do.
No, you do. I am in Delhi saying that that's what the Delhi wallahs say. Of course you do.
Yes, our festival is starting on a note of alienation. We mustn't, that the great thing about Ms. Haksar is that she represents actually a tradition of the greatest inclusion. And actually that's what we're trying to figure out here, is ways of belonging. How can we all belong?
Can I read out a comment someone written
Please.
on my book? This is a comment. I want to read out this comment because I thought it's interesting. It came by SMS from a young student in JNU from Assam. He's very Assamese nationalistic. His mother is a poet, a Sahitya Academy winner, member of Sahitya Academy. And this is what he said about the book. And I thought it summed it up in a very different way. Dear Nandita, I really loved your book. I've been meaning to write to you one long mail or a message about what I loved and why. Perhaps I'll write my reasons not to you, but to the wider audience. But I love the book in most parts where you are confused, perplexed, and throwing some questions to yourself and others and to us. So I have no answers. That's why I'm saying that this book has no answers. There are more questions. But maybe there are better questions.
I totally agree. That's how I felt when I was reading the book, is that it's a process. It's a process that you are engaging in. And it's a very noble one. I mean, we have to, in the end, as Prajwal said, he's got an Indian passport, right? I mean, so we have to find ways to belong.
Okay. Thanks for writing such a nice book. I haven't gone through the book yet. I want to share my agonies with you. I'm from Northeast and I'm a college teacher. I think that my agony will be an extension to your book. So, my college principal was shot dead during 1995. It was a horrible experience for me. Still, I cannot think of it. I couldn't sleep for days. Then we suffered a grenade attack. Then our college building, it was set on fire. So, and I am also a victim of extortion and intimidation in the hand of the terrorists. And we have to go through such a horrible phase that I cannot express you. I have seen some of my students were shot dead on the road. I saw 7 dead bodies of young boys carried to the cemetery in front of my house. So these were some shuddering memories. And I'm a creative writer. I have tried to portray these realities in my work. But what's the answer? Shall we go on writing these books? I think that equal distribution of wealth, more and more democracy will bring an end to all these things. So we want one thing, I give importance to one thing, equal distribution of wealth and development. In my place, terrorism nowadays, it becomes a lucrative industry. Rampant corruption is there, unemployment is there, and young boys, they are lured to terrorism. And I want that India government should listen to Iran Sharmila. She cannot explode a bomb. She cannot kill someone. So she is still unhurt. She is still not unhurt. She is still unhurt. But another political leaders who can kill people, who can explode bombs, they are called for negotiations. And they are giving many amenities by the government. So, because Sharmila is not violent, because Sharmila's protest is democratic, and her protest is peaceful, so she is not given attention at all. Still, she is continuing her with her fight. So I think more and more democracy and equal distribution of wealth, this is the only answer. Thank you.
Hi. On one side, you've been working very intensely with these groups, and that's for many years now. On the other side, you've been one of the most die-hard optimists of democracy. Because in the Gilani case, you said, I would like to think that I'm working in the democratic space. But having been an outsider, and you don't have to answer this question from a Delhiwala's perspective, but having been an outsider who's worked intensely with these groups, do you see any hope for democracy? It's not from the Indian national point of view, but within themselves.
No. The problem is when I write.
Yeah, they got this.
Well, that's what everyone says about me, that how can you write like this, which is very pessimistic, it's reality, and sound so optimistic. Part of the very honest answer is, a part of the answer, that's personal answer, is being a lawyer, you don't feel as helpless as others because you can do something. And so far, touch wood, I've been able to get someone acquitted or get them out of jail. So I think maybe that is one part of the answer. Maybe if I was not a lawyer, if I couldn't do anything, if I just had to watch, it would be, for instance, Gilani's time, it was just I was sitting in Goa, I'd given up practice for various reasons, and I got this call and said, come, and there's BJP government. And despite all this, there was a challenge in the BJP government, and I used to say this from the first day, a man who has who's a Kashmiri Muslim who has a beard and who teaches Arabic, can I defend him? Can I show that there is space in India for getting him acquitted? And I showed that space. The tragedy was that I did this work hoping the democratic, liberal, whoever all of us are, whatever we define, we would take that space. I thought Kashmiris first time they would know that I didn't go to Kashmir, I didn't get money from Kashmir. It was something which created a great sense among Kashmiris saying, who are these people who are taking up a case? Nobody had done it, nobody had done this. No, NGOs had not done it. But there was no movement which took up this case. The people who actually benefited from my work was Jamaat Islami. I didn't work for Jamaat Islami. So the trouble was that I became a darling of the Jamaat Islami. There's nothing optimistic about that. That I can tell you. I have been very depressed. So the same way with Nagaland, I worked on it, for all these years. And who took advantage? Because the liberal, nice people that we all are, we are not organized. So every time I've done something, and that's why now I sit in Goa and write my books that don't meet people.
Unfortunately, we have to come to an end to our session, but I must say that we are talking about ideas of India and ways of belonging. And one of the ways that I feel I belong to this country is because of someone like Nandita Sir. and what she does and who she defends and what she stands for. I mean, that is something I feel like I can belong, right? And that's a complicated thing in India, we continually talk about. But the fact is that you have helped to create that space for all of us to belong. And every day we're going to explore this idea. Would anyone like one more question? Shall we give one more
I
question?
want to just say one thing about Goa and Northeast.
Yeah, please.
I haven't written about this in the book, but I wanted to, and it was cut out, as many things are by the public editor. But you know, the tea tribes in Assam, a lot of people went from Goa, from Nuvei.
They were brought back.
Yeah, they were not brought back. 4 of them came back, and there was a movement to bring them back, but they couldn't be traced. Yes, and that's why there is these links. I mean, it'll be this north and south, and this east and west, and that's why I wrote an open letter to the poet Mozo, talking about this, because now we have all the Northeast boys and girls working on the coast, and we have a Northeast association here of these kids who are working and they're first generation migrants from Northeast. So we are building these kinds of links, and as our friend there said, I agree that it's based on the class, it's based on union, we are trying to make a union out of this. So it's a very different kind of politics, but it is a strange mixture of identity because it is a trade union based on a Northeast identity.